Okay. Good evening. So, I've given this presentation once before, which should be even more reason not to be nervous, but it's been a little while. That was in the old church. And Frank has told me, I don't know how many times, you should do that again. So here we are. So, my goal tonight is to present the stories in this book aren't just stories, that they really happened. And I'm just going to focus on one tiny, but maybe the greatest story in this book. And people come into this church, into this program, and we say, Frank tells us, get into your word, read this book. And especially new people that have never been in this book before, we expect you to believe the stories in here. They're almost supernatural. How could they be real? But I promise you that there are connections in the real world with the words in this book, that they are real. So my attempt tonight is to lay out just one little one and make some connections to reality. So the story of Jesus, we have 4 different accounts. We have 4 different gospels. 4 different people wrote the story of Jesus from their perspective. And we're going to rely a little bit on each one, because each one gives us a little bit different clues. The story of the crucifixion can be found in Matthew chapter 27, Mark chapter 15, Luke chapter 23, and John chapter 19. But we're going to start with a verse from Hebrews 13:12. And it says, therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So that's our first little clue there. And then we're going to go to Mark 15:27 through 29. With him, they also crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, aha, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. And you might think to yourself, where's the clue in this? And it's kind of minute. And those who passed by. How is that a clue? Well, if they're passing by, they're going somewhere. They didn't come here just for this event. They were passing by, which indicates maybe they were walking down a path or maybe a road. So we know it's going to be outside the gate, and we know that there was people that were passing by, perhaps on a road, that didn't come there just for that. So Mike, if you want to go to the next. So we have a map of ancient Jerusalem, and I know it's small. This is the best I could come up with. Not quite on short notice, but if you look at the top, that's north of the old city. You see the city wall. You see what's called the Damascus Gate. And then you have a little hill drawing thing, and you see that there's 2 tombs. There's actually many more. Jerusalem is an ancient city, and it's surrounded by tombs. Not everyone could afford a nice tomb, but there's tombs in the rock all the way around the city. So when we're trying to isolate down, we know that we're outside the wall. So we have a couple of tombs that are outside the wall, and we're looking for a major road. And in ancient times, If you read in the Bible, you might hear mentioned Damascus. Damascus is still a huge city in Syria. I believe it's the capital of Syria. And in the ancient world, there was a road that ran from Damascus to Jerusalem. It was called the Damascus Road. And it ran right from that northern gate all the way to Damascus. And if you were anybody, you were on that road at some point in time. So our next item is Matthew 27, 57 through 60. Now, when evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock, and rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. Then we have Luke 23:53, which says, Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had ever laid before. So, just basically across the street from the Damascus gate is this tomb that is hewn out of solid rock. And you think about the undertaking that it would take to make a room out of solid stone. It's not going to be, you're going to need money to have this done for yourself. If you want to go to the next one, Mike. Okay, so this is inside the garden tomb. And we have, if you notice, this is where the body would have lain. With the left side would have been where the head would be, and then the feet would be down at the bottom. And if you look where the feet would be, you can kind of see that the wall comes down. Everywhere else it's smooth, and like time was taken. Measurements were made to do this. Somebody put their life into creating this out of solid stone. However, we see at where the feet would be, there's a cutout. And if someone was spending the money and taking the time to make their tomb out of solid stone, they're going to know how much room they need to make for them. But what we have here is we have a cutout that probably happened at a different time that indicates that whoever was put in this tomb was probably not the person it was intended for. Next, we go to Matthew 27:33, which says, And when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, place of a skull. Which one am I on? Mark 15:22 says, And they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. John 19:17, And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. So, right nearby this tomb, probably maybe 40 or 50 yards, maybe not even that far. The tomb is just over to the left of this picture. You have this formation of rock. Anybody see a skull? That maybe you could say that's the place of the skull. And we're talking like if you're on the city walls, it's right there. If you're on that Damascus road, you're looking right at this thing. You have to pass this place to come into the city. And this was essentially formed by the builders of the first temple. When they were building the first temple and they were building the city of Jerusalem, which is all made out of stone, they started taking away the stone right outside where they wanted to build the city. And where they stopped was here. And it just happened to leave a formation that kind of looks like a face. Next, we find ourselves in John 19:41. And it says, "Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid." So we have another piece of evidence. They're referring to a garden. Now, if you go to the garden tomb today, it is lush. There's plants there, but you could say, well, was there really a garden in ancient times here? You know, you guys want us to believe this is the tomb of Jesus. You guys got hoses and modern plumbing that you can water it. So you would need a source of water in ancient times. It just so happens that right next to the tomb, not 15 feet away, there is a natural cistern that has maybe existed since creation that holds 250,000 gallons of water. And they still water that garden that's there today from the cistern. And last, but surely not least, we go to Matthew 27:64 through 66. Actually, I'm going to do 62 through 66. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember, while he was still alive, how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away. And say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' So that last deception will be worse than the first." And Pilate said to them, "You have a guard? Go your way. Make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. So we're looking at the Romans. And you can look at other parts. Roman history is super well documented. They were arrogant men. And everything they did, they wanted to be proud of, and they wanted everyone to know about everything they did. So we look at other places in Rome, and whenever the Romans were building something, especially next to stone, they would drill a hole. And they'd take hot lead, which was readily available, and they'd pour that hot lead into that hole that they drilled. And they'd take a bar of iron, and they'd sink it in that hot lead. And when that lead cooled, you had an anchor point. Anybody in construction, you build off of an anchor point. So we go to the tomb, and we find just outside the entrance, we find this little piece of metal that's embedded in the wall. And arguments against this being the tomb of Jesus Christ, they say, it's Jerusalem. You know how much war has been fought over the city, especially in modern times? Bombs exploding. Surely a bomb went off nearby and a piece of shrapnel embedded itself in that wall. So if that were true, if we had the privilege of taking a sample of that metal and having it analyzed, what we would find is we would find alloys. We would find pure metals. Because the Romans, while they were able to, they had metallurgy, they were able to fashion things out of iron, it was not pure like what we have in modern times. So I think it was in the late 90s, the archaeological research group my grandfather is part of got permission from the Garden Tomb and took a small sample of this metal and took it to the University of Jerusalem and had it analyzed. And they found dirty lead and dirty iron, and that's it. So if you want to go to the close-up of that piece of metal. So that's pretty much all the connections that I have for you guys from the Bible with my pictures. But unfortunately, I have a 3-minute video that you guys have to watch.
This is the tomb where Christ lay. You can see that lower end of the tomb it's been hastily cut out to accommodate a tall man. Pan. Byron, what are you pointing at?
This is the iron pin that the Romans sealed the tomb with. They sunk it in, they put hot iron in there, or hot lead, and then put a little bar of iron to seal the great big stone that would have been here, so they couldn't roll it back. And it was sheared off by the angel when he rolled back the stone.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. That's has approximately 13.2 inches to cover the entire opening.
Covering the tomb, coming down, and then coming down to massive pin.
To be the approximate circumference of the stone that would have closed the tomb. And here I'm walking up to where the cistern is. It's right there.
Here is a cistern discovered. Goes way down.
Sometimes you go, like a wave actually, it's real nice. That is so rough.
So, more or less, that's kind of what I have for you guys tonight. Does anybody happen to have any questions? It was surreal. It was definitely a reverent moment. Yeah. Yes. They have kind of a whole visitors thing set up. They have even a gift shop. And they have benches and There's little nooks. If you go at the wrong time of the year, the place is packed, and there's a line to be able to go into the tomb, and I'm pretty sure they limit how much time you can spend in there. But sometimes they have people singing, and they're doing a whole praise thing right there. So, anybody else have any other questions, Jerry? I believe that when they discovered it, if you look in the wall, there is kind of some bricks that have been placed, and I want to say that they had to repair it because when it was discovered, it was covered up and it was damaged. So potentially, at some point, somebody damaged that exterior wall. That's my limited understanding. But as far as I know, I don't think any war activities has done any destruction to that itself, but I only know this much. It was all covered up. Yeah. So. Okay. Nate? Some do. It really has nothing to do with Israelis. And the Israelis are, as far as I know, pretty tolerant because it brings tourists to their country. But the Garden Tomb itself is owned by the Garden Tomb organization, which is based out of England. So it's owned by Christians, Protestants. So. We spent a month in the Garden Tomb, and we excavated right between Golgotha and the tomb itself, what I personally believe was the actual crucifixion site. Unfortunately, we were unable to definitively prove that what we uncovered was the crucifixion site. So that's what I was doing. I was digging a really big hole with a small shovel and buckets. And I'm maybe going to do a presentation on that and the other dig that happened right across the street, maybe at another time. That's why I tried to kind of keep the focus on the tomb. But if you notice in the video, we kind of like the tomb and then the cistern, and then we kind of skipped to Golgotha. And that was kind of the reasons, because we were digging and we put maybe 30 feet deep by maybe 40 feet by 25 feet. And we moved all that dirt in a couple of weeks by hand. So it was pretty incredible. So I don't know if that answers your question. So I was dirty and carrying my hard hat because we were then doing there, and my grandfather was like, let's go get some video. Because we weren't allowed, when we were going to go on this dig, we had to sign this non-disclosure with the state of Israel. That was a lot of documents that we had to sign. And so we weren't allowed to bring cameras or video into the dig site. But my grandfather was the videographer for the group. And so one day I gave him my camera, and so he carried it in, so it wasn't me. And then he was like, okay, Byron, let's go do some filming, which was pretty much like, okay, go over there and then walk over here. So, which at the time I was like, and even after I was just like, oh, this is kind of dumb. I'm just walking across the screen. But I think it kind of worked okay tonight. So, Levi? Yeah, the cliff face. So I didn't really, okay, I was going to save this from another talk, but everybody's idea of the crucifixion is 3 crosses on a hill. I mean, every depiction that you get of the crucifixion is 3 crosses on a hill. And if you saw in that, there is a hill above Golgotha, and there's actually a Muslim cemetery up there now. And I went up there. To get up there, you have to walk like over 100 yards. You have to walk way up the street and then up another street and then climb up the hill to get on top. Whereas that cliff face is like you leave the Damascus Gate and it's boom, you see it. So the likelihood that they would have, I mean, he was already struggling with that cross. He needed another guy to carry it. And the likelihood that they went all the way 3 times further and then came back to be on top of that hill, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. So most likely, he was crucified right up against that cliff face that comes from Golgotha all the way over to the tomb. So it's a little bit different than what maybe everybody was imagining when they read the story or see any Christian depictions. So they want everybody to see it. The crucifixion was not a unique act. It happened in Britain all the way to where from one end of the Roman Empire to the other. If you did something bad, you were most likely going to get crucified. If there was a tree right outside the city gates, they didn't make a cross. They just nailed you to a tree. And they would always put up signs in the languages that would have been spoken by the people that would be coming down, and they'd always pick the busiest road, the busiest gate, and they'd do it there. And it's very effective because everybody coming into that city may not know the Roman laws, but they'd see that guy, and they'd be like, I don't want to be that guy. So, okay. It's not the same plants that were there in Jesus' day. They don't make it that long. Yeah, I mean, it's lush, but we're talking about a very arid place to begin with. I mean, it's probably comparatively dry to like Wyoming. You know, I mean, they get rain, but it's not a lot. They get a little bit of snow, but it's not a lot. So, you know, water is kind of a precious resource, and it's not lush. But in the garden, it is greener than what you're going to see in other places around Jerusalem. A lot of the area around Jerusalem is very rugged, very rocky, and not a lot of plants. A lot of brown. So, that answers your question. Well, okay, so you have maybe around Jerusalem, that's feeding nobody. But you have the Jordan River Plain, which you come out of the mountains, which are, I mean, by our standards, they're big hills. But they call them mountains. And they like it when you call them mountains around Jerusalem. But when you come out of the mountains of Jerusalem, you come down into this very fertile plain. Maybe not down by the Dead Sea, but up north. And even now in Israel, just as it was back then, they grow a lot of food in that plain. So there is an area to support that city not too far away. And they grow a lot of food even today in the Jordan River Valley. So I don't know if that helps. I believe in Jesus Christ. And that the stories in this Bible aren't just stories about imaginary people having extraordinary circumstances. They are extraordinary circumstances, one might even say supernatural. But our God is great, and He is supernatural. And as God wills it, it is done. Call it good? Okay.
And kind of went into the ground. They rolled that stone. It was 13 and a half foot in diameter, about that wide, solid stone, 13 and a half foot. They rolled it up there. Lots of men rolled it up there, and it come and fell in against that rod. The only way to get in there was to go through that iron. And in that day, there was no way to cut iron. That piece of iron kept that stone from going. God just sheared that off, just rolled that stone away. Amazing. Because it was permanently closed until God rose on the third day. That was, to me, that was my defining moment on this story before. And I just wanted to emphasize that for you tonight. Thank you, Byron. You've done a great job. Thank you, sir. He's got some more he wants to do later. We need to follow up and finish. I forgot the details of the other story, but it's good too. He's been digging over there.